think the world does need a global policeman. I think it would be the best system if the U.S. was the global policeman. But I also think we are incapable and unprepared to do it. So I'm trying to be a realist.
The call has long been from many sides. America needs to worry only about what happens here, on these grounds, and we must step away from becoming the world cop. Those days are gone. This is a new world and a new era, and we are only fooling ourselves that we are so widely needed. This is, as you might guess, an opinion that is not shared by those who have a somewhat sharper understanding of what the world is today. Let's go ahead and welcome to MidPoint Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, foreign affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and author of America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. Bret Stephens joins us today on the show. Bret, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here.
Is it not fair to say that that's exactly what we hear, Bret, and that's what people say? Wait a minute, stop this. We've got to take care of what's at home first. But isn't that a terribly myopic view that really means that people don't understand how the world works 24/7?
Well, exactly, because our security and our prosperity here in the United States depends on not living in a world that is characterized by invasions, by terrorists breeding jihadis that they can export to the West, by regimes like Iran developing nuclear weapons. We live in one world, and we are the world superpower. We are it by virtue of the size of our economy, our values, our interests around the world, our trading partners, the alliances that we treasure. That's a lesson we learned the hard way more than 70 years ago when we tried to put our heads in the sand in a policy called isolationism, and discovered that the rest of the world wouldn't leave us alone even if we wanted to leave it alone. And so after the Second World War, statesmen from Harry Truman through Ronald Reagan through George W. Bush understood that we had no option but leadership. The alternative is what? Do you want Vladimir Putin to be the world's policeman? Do you want the United Nations to be the world's policeman? We have to live in the world as it is, and we want the world to have a policeman who is serious, sober, sensible, and who we can trust. And that happens to be the United States. That's a view that's widely shared from Poland to Jerusalem to Taipei. So if we just abandon this role, the result isn't going to be a return to the Garden of Eden. The result is going to be global pandemonium that is going to draw us back in on the worst possible terms.
What is it then, Bret, that keeps us so naive as a country that we can be an isolationist? Is it simply our leadership? Is it the fact that we'd rather watch reality shows 24/7 a day? What is it?
Well, there's no question that for most Americans, foreign policy is something they watch on TV more than it is the substance of their everyday life. Although if they stop and think about it for a moment, that's not quite true. I mean, I'm sure many people who are listening in to this show have maybe a Samsung phone in their pocket, and they should stop and think, well, how did that Samsung phone get there? Well, maybe it's because in 1950, Harry Truman made the decision that he wasn't going to allow a communist dictatorship to take over South Korea. And then we kept troops in South Korea for many decades, and South Korea went from being one of the most impoverished and backward states in the world to being a thriving free market democracy that is a major trading partner of ours and that provides us with Samsung phones just as we provide it with all kinds of goods and services. That's a free trading, prosperous, open world defined by what we call Pax Americana, defined by the American security umbrella. So it does matter to them. And I don't think, with all respects to Jonathan Gruber, all the same, Americans aren't so stupid. I think Americans are waking up to a world where ISIS is on the rise, Iran may get nuclear weapons, and they're saying, we've got to be serious about this world. So I think Americans are waking up to the danger of and the consequences of a policy of inaction and retreat by President Obama.
Now, you also brought up just now the president and some of these policies of retreat. Because as you look at the whole idea of going into other countries and being the world cop, let's be honest, Bret, we're not very good at it. That's what many people would say at this point. We go in, we get involved in a war, we come out, 2 years later we're right back in it again, 6 years later we're right back in it. We're not good at it. So then why should we be involved, or then how do we then make ourselves better at it? Do we just need to become a little more militaristic in the end?
Well, I mean, that criticism is actually a relatively fair point. I mean, when we went into Iraq in 2003, we went into Iraq to make an example of Saddam Hussein because he had been a 25-year security crisis, not just simply for the Middle East, but for the United States as well. And it was right to make an example of Saddam. He was a one-man weapon of mass destruction with probably more than 1 million lives on his hands. And yet we stayed in Iraq to try to make Iraq exemplary, to try to heal a crippled society. And between making an example of Iraq and trying to make Iraq exemplary, that's where we really went badly wrong. So we have to rediscover the virtues of what used to be known as police actions. I mean, does anyone remember how we got rid of Manuel Noriega in the early 1990s? Of course not, but Panama's a much better place for it. And get out of the business of long-term efforts to rehabilitate crippled societies that are not only difficult to accomplish under the best of circumstances, but very difficult to sell to the American people.
I got about 90 seconds left here, but I do want to get down to what was in the article where you talked about the broken windows model of U.S. foreign policy. What exactly is that?
Well, people understand that crime is not just a matter of root causes. Crime is a matter of the environment. If you see that one broken window in a neighborhood is left unrepaired, pretty soon all of the rest of the windows in that building are likely to be broken. Environmental signals are sent that no one's in charge, no one cares, and anything goes. And that's how we had the skyrocketing crime rates of the 1970s and 1980s. And then people like Mayor Giuliani, commissioners like William Bratton realized that they had to make sure that they were creating a sense of order in American cities, the sense that there was a cop on the beat, keeping an eye both for the good citizens and keeping an eye on potential hooligans. Well, what's true in the cities, what rescued us from horrific crime rates and brought those rates way down, is also true in foreign policy. It's not an accident that 6 months after Bashar Assad's attacks in Syria and our crossed red line, you had Russia invading Ukraine, because the signal was no one cares, no one's in charge. So broken windows foreign policy makes sure that America does care, America is in charge, and that when a president draws a red line, he sticks to it.
I would heartily recommend that people pick this up. It was in the Wall Street Journal on the Saturday essay. It is titled, "Yes, America Should Be the World's Policeman," because whether or not you believe with the concept, it certainly will give you an opportunity to consider what exactly that concept is and how it works within the global society. And also then don't forget the book itself, America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. Bret Stephens, thanks so much for joining us, my friend. Great reading material. We'll talk again.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. After the break, the nation that no matter who we seek to paint them as becoming part of the global community, their crushing hate of women speaks otherwise. It's a nation that perhaps we need to get a whole lot tougher with. That's coming up right here, where we question everything on MidPoint.
House Speaker John Boehner responds to President Obama's immigration plan. Boehner says the president makes working together on immigration reform, quote, virtually impossible, end quote. Meanwhile, House Republicans file lawsuit over Obamacare. According to the New York Times, the suit cites abuses of power over the way the Affordable Care Act was rolled out. A deal on Iran's nuclear program before next week's deadline is highly unlikely. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iran's foreign minister have left the negotiation table today. And a freak autumn storm starts to wind down. Parts of Buffalo remain buried under 7 feet of snow, and now residents worry about their roofs and flooding when the snow finally melts. What a mess. I'm Olga VILLAVERDE. Another Newsmax Now update is coming your way at the top of the hour, and of course, we are keeping our eye on Ferguson. Any developments there, we will bring them to you live. I'm Olga VILLAVERDE, and always stay connected to Newsmax.com.